This is the former Nazi concentration camp at Ravensbrück, which is located in northeastern Germany. When I was 10 years old, a neighbour had a pile of books in the garage and asked me if I'd like any of them. I went to the garage, and amongst them I picked up a book about Odette Sansom, the British agent who worked for the French resistance. After her capture in 1943, she was taken via Fresnes prison in Paris to Karlsruhe and then Ravensbruck concentration camp. The book started with a description of the Ravensbruck trial in 1947, and even at that age I was very much impressed by the description of Carmen Mory, one of the accused, a lady who came from Switzerland. If you saw my video from Ravensbrück where I was walking around and talking from the top of my head, at times I was struggling to remember the description of the camp left by Odette Sansom, which I had read so many years earlier. But what I never forgot was the description of Carmen Mory in the dock. If that was my reaction from a book, one can understand how reporters at the time actually reacted to seeing her in the dock. Karolina Lanskoronska was a prisoner in Block 10 in Ravensbrück. She wrote of Carmen Mory, hair and eyes as black as a raven, a very wide, thin-lipped mouth and a heavy jaw. At first sight, the expression on that face, neither human nor animal, gave me such a surprise that I could not recall where I had seen it before. It was only later that I recalled the prototype from my mind of the she-devils painted by the 15th century Dutch artist Hieronymus Bosch. So this is the story of one such she-devil who became the elegant lady in the dock at the Ravensbrück trial. Carmen Mory was a spy, and the very nature of this work means that a lot of material cannot be checked. To make it worse, she had a very vivid imagination, as you will see, and on top of that, there are legends about her. Carmen Mory was born on the 2nd July 1906 in Bern. Her father was a doctor and her mother was from the Philippines. According to Mory, her mother was called Leona von Kaufmann-Bischoff and was of royal Spanish blood. The Philippines had been part of the Spanish Empire until conquered by the United States in 1898. What a member of the Spanish royal family was doing there, I don't know. Her father had met her and persuaded her to leave her British husband and 2 children and come to live with him in Adelboden, Switzerland. They had 3 girls, the youngest being Carmen, born in 1906. Carmen evidently got her good looks from her mother. Carmen was able to travel. She grew up in Switzerland and as from 1925 also travelled to France, Holland, Italy and the United Kingdom. She could speak 6 languages. She spent 2 years in Amsterdam, then at the end of 1928 she went to the United Kingdom. She left the UK in 1930 and studied music and singing in Munich until 1932. Unfortunately for her, her dreams of becoming an opera singer were destroyed due to an operation on her tonsils caused by tonsillitis. She claimed to have studied journalism in Munich and Berlin, which is probably not true, but she did write on a freelance basis for a number of publications, including the Manchester Guardian. She also attended events in art history, literature and philosophy. She was living in Berlin with her partner Fritz Erler, and later she was to boast that they were the capital's most celebrated couple. If there's any truth in the stories that have since been told, then that's probably no idle boast. As the Nazi Party came to power, the couple sought out leading Nazis in order to further their own careers. Mory claimed to have had a sexual relationship with Joseph Goebbels, Whether or not they actually met, I don't know, but with her dark good looks, she was definitely his type. She also claimed to have been friendly with Ernst Udet, the World War I pilot who was the father of the Luftwaffe, and Alfred Rosenberg, who was one of the first Nazis and one of the philosophers of the party. Of course, I'm using the word philosopher in inverted commas. The couple were living well beyond their means. Her work writing didn't pay the bills, so they resorted to borrowing money and then not paying it back. One advantage for them of the Nazi system was that they could always denounce the people they owed money to, so that they would be arrested. The denunciation could take the form of saying that they were secret anti-Nazis. After all, most people in Germany were anti-Nazi, but by this time they were too terrified of the secret police to actually do anything about it. In the book, In Full Flight, A Story of Africa and Atonement by John Hemingway, we read that in 2010, a woman in Manchester reported that her mother had lived in a room in a boarding house next to Mory and Erler in Berlin. The British lady regularly sang with Mory, who might have had to give up a singing career, but she still liked to do so and apparently had a fine voice. The boarding house had thin walls and the noise of Mory and Erler's sexual games could easily be heard. Carmen would hit Fritz with metal chains whilst taunting him. When they disappeared without paying the rent, the landlady showed the British tenant congealed blood on the walls of their room, testament to their sadomasochistic behaviour. Another story is recounted in Caterina Abazzi's 1999 biography of Carmen Mory. As mentioned earlier, she would seek out the leaders of the Third Reich in clubs and restaurants, or wherever she thought they might be. On one night, she caught everyone's attention in such a locale by suddenly breaking into a song by Cole Porter, the American who wrote Begin the Begin, I Get the Kick Out of You, I've Got You Under My Skin, and You're the Top, amongst many others. With all eyes glued on her, she began flinging off her clothes. In time to the music, she expertly removed everything, and by the time the song ended, she was completely naked. This brought a round of applause from the men there, whilst the women quickly removed their husbands from the locale. On another occasion, when she stripped, she bent her head back so far that her hair caught fire from a candle positioned behind her. The fire on her hair had to be put out by admiring men in military uniform. News of her antics travelled as far as Switzerland, and her father wrote a stern letter. Carmen did not respond, leaving that job to Fritz. He wrote, Carmencita can be difficult, and she's not an easy person to understand, but she's the only woman with whom I can be happy, and it's my greatest wish to be everything for her. I know her faults well, as it's now 2 years that we've been together. Her generous big heart and her intelligence have made me realize that she is the one with whom I wish to spend the rest of my life. Her brutal honesty can be overwhelming, yet I know she will change me, and I realize that some personality traits can only be battled as a couple. However, Fritz was not the only one completely caught up in Carmen's spell. Bruno Sattler was, according to a Gestapo organizational chart dated the 22nd of January 1934, in charge of Department 3B2. The job of this department was to spy on members of the former political parties, the SPD, the SAP, and the Reichsbanner Schwarz-Rot-Gold, as well as the former trade unions. These mass organizations had had millions of members in Germany in 1933, and all had been made illegal by the Nazis. In order to spy on them, he needed a number of what was called V-Männer, what we would call informants. Around 90% of all informants were male, so no doubt he welcomed some female assistants. Bruno Sattler was also a murderer. On the night of the 1st to 2nd of February 1934, Sattler was responsible for the killing of 4 communist detainees, John Scher, Eugen Schönhaar, Erich Steinfurt, and Rudolf Schwarz. These 4 were killed while they were attempting to escape, to use the vernacular of the time. Sattler is not very well known, but I think his career and fate in East Germany is something worth exploring in a future video. How Sattler and Mory met, I don't know. I have a feeling that she might have volunteered her services to him, but I've no proof of this. In 1934, he appointed her Gestapo agent S11. The information she provided him on people in her milieu was probably mainly fabricated by her. She even denounced her own partner Fritz as being a homosexual. Sattler knew she was lying and caught her out, but he appears to have been entranced. It was he who arranged for Mory and Fritz Erler to go to Paris, where, using her language skills and her nature, she might prove to be useful for the Nazis. Journalists often are used as a cover, so in this case Carmen Mory already had her own official identity. Her real task in France was to investigate the German émigré, Max Braun, and to see if he were running an escape route for Jewish people out of Germany. Using journalism as a cover, she managed to get past Max Braun's housekeeper and into his private apartment. She was rifling through his files when he returned unexpectedly. He demanded that she leave. She, in turn, removed her clothes, and thus another man crumbled at her feet. It would seem that the combined financial effort of the publishing house and the Gestapo was unable to keep Carmen Mory and Fritz Erler in the lifestyle that they wanted. Soon they were in debt. Mory went to the Swiss embassy and was able to get a loan from them, which enabled them to keep afloat for a couple of months, whilst enjoying all that Paris had to offer. Sattler ordered them to gather information on the Maginot Line and to infiltrate an anti-Nazi periodical in Paris. Then he gave the order to kill the publisher of the periodical. They decided to do this in the street. Whilst on their way there, they decided to drop into the Georges V Café on the Champs-Élysées for a bottle of champagne. They were, by this time, under surveillance by the French authorities, and whilst in the café, they were arrested. For the next 18 months, they were held on remand in La Petite Roquette prison. After this, they were put on trial, and on the 28th of April 1940, they were sentenced to death. Following the death sentence, Mory offered to work for the French in intelligence gathering. Perhaps due to the fact that the Germans had broken through, and thinking that she'd be more useful alive than dead, the request was passed as far as the President of France, the 68-year-old Albert François Lebrun. The President of France agreed to waive the death sentence in return for Carmen Mory becoming a French agent. Mory did not make any request for Fritz Erler. He was executed by firing squad on the 6th of June 1940, only 8 days before the Germans captured Paris. On learning of his death, Mory expressed no signs of regret. Mory's job as a French spy didn't last long. After only 2.5 weeks, she wrote a letter complaining of how ungrateful they were for what she was doing, which was probably not anything anyway. She got no reply. In the circumstances, the French military had other problems on its mind. Mory was captured by a German unit in Tours. She was sent back to Paris, where she spent 2 weeks in the same Fresnes prison where Odette Sansom was to be detained nearly 3 years later. From there, she was sent back to Berlin and interned in the Alexanderplatz prison, but was able to get released after a few weeks. She was back in Berlin. The capital no longer welcomed her as it had. In Berlin, she found herself friendless. Her role in the Gestapo was probably public knowledge by this time. No one wanted to have anything to do with Gestapo agents. She decided to flee to Switzerland where her past might not be known and start again. However, she was caught, and Bruno Sattler decided that he no longer needed her in the Gestapo. She didn't take no for an answer and reported to Sattler's boss, Reinhard Heydrich. She promised never to flee again. It would seem that Heydrich was impressed. With the knowledge I have of Heydrich's character, I can guess what happened. However, even the protection of the head of the Fiat Security Service was not enough for her. Only 4 months later, Mory went to the Swiss embassy in order to apply for a passport. On leaving, she was arrested. The Swiss refused assistance. She still owed them money from the debt in Paris. She was bundled away, shouting insults at both the arresting officers and the Swiss embassy staff. In prison, Carmen Mory attempted suicide. This was reported to Bruno Sattler, who passed the news on to his boss. Heydrich determined that she would not die like that and ordered her sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she became prisoner number 5749. From enjoying the high life in Berlin and Paris, hobnobbing with the rich and famous, she had spent 18 months in a French prison, got herself a death sentence there, got out of that death sentence, but now she was in a Nazi concentration camp. In part 2, we shall see what happened to her there and the events that were to lead to her being held in the dock in Hamburg, once more fighting for her life.